Welcome to Father-Daughter Conversations podcast, episode 3.
Hi, Monique.
Hello, Dad. How are you today?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
I'm doing all right. Are you sleepy today?
I'm a little tired. It was a long day at work.
So, this episode, guys, it's going to be about our experience with law enforcement. So, first and foremost, I want to say that my father was a former police officer for how many years?
About 7.5 years.
7.5 years. And I was in the middle of growing up, like childhood to preteens, when you were going through the academy. So we're going to share a little bit about our experience with, my dad going through the police academy and then going into law enforcement. So the first question I have for you today is, what do you want people to know about law enforcement and police work?
Well, I think, it's a very complex, that's a complex question, and especially in today's, in light of what's going on today and all the things that have happened in the last couple of years. But I think, what people need to understand is why people get into law enforcement in the first place. And I just don't think they really understand that. I know for me, and for most of the police officers that I worked with over the years and the ones that I still work with today in different capacities, they all got into it for really because they wanted to help people. And that's really the main goal, is in a million different ways. And I don't think that's another thing we can talk about, is all the different ways and skill sets that you have to have for this job. But basically, bottom line is, you want to help people. You want to serve your community. You want to make it a better place. You want to make it a safer place to live, and you want to help people. And that's, when I think that's a pretty noble cause. And you don't get into it for the money. You don't get into it for the, obviously for the fame and the prestige. You get into it because you want to help people, and that's what I decided to do, and that's why I got into it.
So that's why you chose. And how did you think that you were going to be able to help people, like, before you started, versus like what you actually saw yourself, like how you saw yourself helping people during?
Well, I think just like most people, when you start and before you go to the academy, and when you first get to the academy, you're pretty naive about the job. I mean, I know I certainly was. I had what I'd seen on TV and when I had gone on ride-alongs, I had a somewhat of an idea of what's involved, but I had no idea the complexity of the job and how many things I would learn over the course of my career, how many different situations I would be in. I mean, that's one of the things that almost every police officer that I know says, that's one of the things they like about the job. There no days are the same. Every day is different. Every challenge is different. Every shift is different. And so that's true. But that brings with it a lot of complexity to the job. And so you can be dealing with one critical incident in 1 minute, and then 5 minutes later, you've got a totally different one, but they're equally important, equally dangerous potentially. So I started out thinking I didn't really know exactly what I would be doing to help people, but over time I learned that means a lot of different things. So it can be literally saving somebody's life, maybe at a traffic accident. I remember showing up to some horrific traffic accidents, and people were really seriously hurt and scared to death. And you do what you can to calm them down, control the scene, keep them safe, keep them calm until the ambulance gets there. I remember one case where there had been a shooting, and a car crashed into the back of another car, and there were 3 girls in the car, and they were all hurt pretty bad, and one of them had knocked out all of her teeth, and she didn't know it, and she was laying on the ground, in a lot of pain, upset, crying. But when she reached up and felt her mouth and realized she had knocked out all of her teeth, she just went crazy. I mean, she just panicked. And so, trying to keep her calm and trying to maintain, the scene, secure the scene until other police officers got there, and the ambulance got there. It was tough. So that's just one, working with, things like a rape victim or a child molestation victim, or, and then you've got, it's just, there's just so many different types of things that you're required to do and have to be trained to do. And people don't. I don't think people realize that. They don't see that. They don't know the complexity of the job.
So that's something I don't think the academy could prepare you for the like in a lot of ways prepare you for the actual. How do you think the academy prepared you, and maybe did not prepare you?
Well, I will say that you're right. It can never prepare you fully for what you're going to experience day one when you hit the streets. But I will say that they do it. They did an amazing job. I can't speak for every police academy, but the one I went to in California and in Gilroy, and then later on in San Jose, I look back at that time. I had my run-ins with some of the instructors and others I liked a lot, like any job. But overall, they do a really good job of replicating what you're going to do on the street in the academy. So they call them scenario tests. So when you take a lot of written tests. I mean, I don't know how many. Just it was an incredible amount of written tests, but you also do scenario testing where you walk into a room and there's actors that are police officers usually, and they're acting out different scenarios, different crimes, and you have to react as if that is an actual case. So if it could be anything from a suicide attempt to an overdose to a crime scene of like a robbery or something, and then you have to treat it like it's real. I had some pretty interesting ones, some funny ones, some. I remember one of them was I had to get in a car and drive out to an abandoned airstrip, and there was a building there with a bunch of boxes and stuff, and there was a guy supposedly spraying graffiti on the building, vandalizing the building. So my responsibility was to get out of the car, put the spotlight on him, call him over, try to make contact with him, and I was told, no, there's no backup coming. Go talk to him. So I start walking toward, and it's an ambush. So I turned around and ran for cover, returned fire, but I tripped in the dark on the pavement, tore my hands up, broke my flashlight, dove behind the car. I mean, when it's happening, it's real. It's very real, and they do a good job of that.
Yeah, because that's a situation that could really happen. Yeah.
And then they bring in speakers, like they brought in, for example, a heroin addict one time, and she talked about what it was like to be a heroin addict, so they really do a good job. But driving scenarios, shooting scenarios, every scenario you can think of, they try to cover. And then at the end, then there's also the physical fitness side of it. So you're running every day, you're doing all kinds of different exercises, and so all of that kind of leads up to the culmination of the end of the academy. And I don't remember the percentages, but it seems like it was something like a third of the class, a fourth to a third don't make it through, and they told us that in the beginning, and it was true. It wasn't easy. It was a lot harder than most people thought. And I was pretty old. I was 35, so I was the oldest guy in the class, and determined to beat out all the young guys and girls.
So what's something you think that the police academy lacked in preparing, and like I can imagine like preparing you mentally, emotionally, all that. Like I was saying, I don't think they really could, right? So what do you think they lacked in preparing you?
I don't know that they lacked anything. I mean, I think it could be longer, even though it seemed like it lasted forever because there was so much pressure on everybody. But I mean, there's still other things that they could cover. But I think it's at least in California, it's pretty comprehensive, and I don't know that they would want to invest a lot more time than what they already do. But there were certain things. I think a lot has changed, of course, since I was in the academy. So I mean, there's a lot of there's been changes to laws and policies and so forth, and especially nowadays, a lot of things have changed, and so I'm sure that's covered now in the in the classroom and out on the field. So I think it's but I do think it was a really good experience. I valued that a lot. I learned a lot about dealing with people, but also teamwork, and that whole concept of your fellow officers, or that they're your family, they're your team. They're there for you, and you need to be there for them, because you're going to be put in situations where you're going to really need to trust each other. And that came through loud and clear when I was there.
Did you guys do like any team building or like trust type exercises? How did you learn to grow that trust within each other?
Not the kumbaya fall back in somebody's arms and no, but I think over time you learn to respect each other because they see that you're going through all this stuff together, and you're working toward a common goal. And even though you may not work together at the same department in the future because we were from all different departments, you just kind of that respect and appreciation for each other just kind of naturally grows. I think it's kind of similar probably in the military, and I think police departments are paramilitary operations, and so a lot of those same things apply. And you learn that you've got to have each other's back, and I think that if you graduate from a police academy, you walk out of there with that knowledge and that feeling.
Mm-hmm. So what did you like and what did you not like about police work, about being a policeman?
I think that every police officer will tell you they don't like the paperwork, but that was the paperwork, so to speak. The report writing was one of my strengths, and so even though I didn't necessarily like it, I realized how important it was. So if you can't write a good report that's clear, concise, makes sense, is in chronological order, all those things, then you're probably going to not have a very good chance of winning that case if it goes to court. So it's really important that you pay attention to whatever your surroundings are and what happened from the minute you got the call on the radio to the minute you wrap up the call, and then you're able to document it well. And at least I was told by my supervisors that was one of my strong suits. And I agree. Looking back I kept a lot of my reports, and I've reread them, and that was something I was good at. The parts I probably didn't like, sometimes were just really the basic traffic enforcement, things that were just kind of in some ways boring and kind of monotonous. But there were other times where like I said, it's a strange job because there sometimes, especially if you work the night shift, graveyard shift, there are long periods where there might not be a lot going on, and then all of a sudden it's just super intense for the next 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then it's back to kind of and it wreaks havoc on your system. I mean, your adrenaline levels go through the roof. Your heart rate goes through through the ceiling, and then you're back sitting down in a car, having to be calm, having to think, having to write. Or we used to record our report, so we did filled out a face sheet by hand, and then we had little cassette tape recorders, and we recorded our reports, and then we turned them in at the end of the shift, and they had people that typed up our reports for us. Probably the hardest part of the job was if you got, there were nights where we might have 10, 12, 15 reports, and trying to keep track of all of the things that happened, all the names, all the addresses, all the everything that happened in that report, and then recall it at the end of the night and not get them confused or leave out something important. That was probably one of the most challenging parts of the job. But there really wasn't anything, I don't think, that I'd say that I didn't like. I guess if I had to pick one thing, it would be dealing with people that weren't grateful, and that old joke, I pay your salary type thing, from somebody who really had no reason to just, they're not in a good mood, had a bad day or whatever, but you learn to deal with it and try to always be professional if you can.
Did anything scare you, or what did you consider really dangerous?
I look back now at certain situations that probably should have been more frightening to me, but at the time you just don't think about it very much. I mean, you don't have time to. You can't dwell on it. Now, you might think about it at night when you get ready to go to bed, and it kind of, those images play back in your head, and sometimes they never go away. I mean, I've still got a few things that I saw that to this day I haven't forgotten, and they reoccur sometimes. But I don't think it's that. There were a few incidents, especially my first 6 months or so on the force, where I got into a couple of situations that I was like, oh crap, how am I going to get out of this one? Um, and that's when you learn. I had really good training officers. I had excellent, what we called FTOs, field training officers. One of them his name was Corporal Gaston, and he was just, a guy worked like a maniac. He worked harder than anybody I ever worked with, and yet he always stressed officer safety over anything and everything. And so, his whole point was, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. Call for backup. Always make sure you have backup when possible. And so there's a lot of things you can do to mitigate that risk. My department, California, I mean, as far as I know, they still haven't had an officer shot. Um, and part of that is because they're very professional in the way they deal with people, and I think that's important. I think I remember a few situations especially with gang members where they're extremely dangerous, and they're very unpredictable, so you really don't know what they're going to do sometimes. And that's the situation I was talking about. I put myself in a situation one time. I was on a dead end street, late at night by myself, and was surrounded by gang members, and they came out and kind of surrounded my car. Mm-hmm. And luckily we had a gang unit called VSU, and they got there really quickly. So there were a few situations that were tense, mm-hmm. but I think for the most part you get paid to do the job, and you can't deal with, you can't worry too much about it. You just have to be careful and do the best you can in every situation.
Did anything surprise you about being a police officer, looking back or during the time?
Yeah, I think a lot of things surprised me. I think every day was, like I said, every day is different, and so every day is a surprise. I mean, there were some horrible things. There were some funny things. Police officers have, really bizarre sense of humor. You have to have. Mm-hmm. And I think I was, that kind of surprised me. I think that's where you build the camaraderie and the trust, because you have this kind of dark sense of humor. You have to have. You can't see the things we see and not have that. So they were practical jokers, and they played some. My last night when I was on probation before I went solo, they played a practical joke on me, and it was, I look back at that, I'll never forget it. It was hilarious. And
what was the joke?
I don't want to get anybody in trouble. No, they had Gaston again.
You can tell me after if you want to tell me. After.
No, I'll take it. I thought it was funny. They asked me if I had ever, if I had seen a dead body.
When they jumped out at you.
Yeah. And I said, yeah, I have. And he goes, but if you handled a homicide scene solo? And I said, no. And he goes, well, let's go. So I shouldn't have known right then, but we went to an empty parking lot in the middle of nowhere. It was dark, and they already had crime scene tape up, and there was one officer there, and there was a body in the parking lot. It was covered by the yellow tarp, and he was going over and take a look. And so,
that would have been your first dead body.
Well, it would have been the first one that I had seen.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, so I went over there to pull the cover back, and it was another officer who was laying underneath the cover, jumped out, boo. And I think jumped straight up and started running backwards in the air, like, going for my gun. And the whole third shift was standing over there behind the building, just dying laughing. And Gaston grabbed me from behind, and they all came out. It was like, congratulations, you made it through training. And then we did a lot of things that were, just kind of foolish stuff. But
I think a lot of people in hospitals, they have to have that kind of, like, otherwise it gets sad,
Yeah, I mean, and I spent a lot of time in hospitals. I mean, when you take somebody in for what's called 5150 for a psychological evaluation, and you get to know all the doctors, and you sit there for hours waiting for the psychiatrist to come in and do an evaluation. And so I spent a lot of time in hospitals. But those were some of the good memories, the jokes and stuff. And then it's but again, you just kind of get to know the people, and there was a lot. There was a lot.
So, what do you think you learned from being a police officer? And what do you want people to know about your experience?
Well, I learned a lot of things. Different, like I said, you need so many different. There's so many different skill sets that apply. So I learned how to kind of put together my thoughts, how to speak in public because you testify in court, and you also make presentations to the public. I made a lot of presentations at schools and to community groups and neighborhood groups. Um, so that's one skill set. Learning, like I said earlier, learning to write in a concise manner because those reports are going to be used in court against the people you've arrested. Um, I learned, the importance of staying in shape, the importance of a lot of different things. But I think the most important one was probably how to deal with people, how to deal with the public. So you got to realize, for the most part, when the people you're dealing with is probably the worst day of their life. I had a sergeant one time ask me, Keith, how many times in your life has a police officer come and knocked on your door? And I honestly had never had one except for one time when my father passed away. They came, so that was it. But some of these people, some of these kids have had police officers constantly coming to their house, coming to their door. And so you can see why they have some of the animosity that they have. But you learn to deal with those kind of stressful situations, angry people, drunk people, crazy people, you name it. Every type of person, every type of scenario, trying to, I didn't speak really good Spanish, but it was close enough to where because I did speak fluent Portuguese, so I could get by with my Spanish. I had some funny situations with that too, but but they could understand me, and I could make myself understood. So
yeah, we lived in an area where there were a lot of Spanish speakers.
A lot of Hispanics, and a lot of some people spoke some English, but occasionally you'd come across somebody that didn't speak any English, both the victim of the crime and then the criminal, and you would have to do question both of them and try to. If you didn't have an interpreter available, over time I got better and better and better at it and could speak better Spanish, but and that was something else I learned. Learned communication. So there was a lot of how to deal with your coworkers and a lot of different personalities there, and again, those relationships, how to work with very little sleep, because a lot of times we got next to no sleep and
different shifts all over the place, like night shifts or day shifts.
Yeah, that was really hard for me because I was always a night person, but having to work for a while and swing shifts that kind of in the middle I didn't mind too much because I'm a night owl anyway, but that graveyard shift kicked my ass, having to get up. You would go to bed when the sun was coming up, and that was hard to adjust to at first. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that I learned, and so what I've realized, a lot of what I learned I've been able to use in every other job I've had since then. I have to do a lot of writing now. I do a lot of public speaking now. I deal with angry parents and happy parents and kids with disabilities and kids that have gotten into trouble, and so a lot of the same similarities apply. And I think that's I didn't really realize at the time how I was going to use those things, but I did.
What do you want people to know about your experience as a police officer? And from here we can go into what's happening in the 13 states with the defunding the police.
Well, I think one thing I wanted you to mention it too is how it impacts the family life, how it impacted you. Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of the general public understands how difficult it is on the family. It's not an easy job, and I think naively, your mother used to help me study, for weeks for the when I was in the academy.
I remember helping you study.
Yeah,
too.
we made
when you had to remember the streets and all the codes.
Yeah, little flashcards. We used to, you guys used to quiz me, and we used to walk the streets and drive the streets to get to know the neighborhoods.
No GPS during those times.
No, there was no GPS. one of my other field training officers, Earl had a book with all the streets in alphabetical order and the major cross streets, and so we memorized those. And so the whole, the whole family went through that. You and your mom went through that with me, and so you suffered, just like I did when I was in the academy. But once you get out and you go to work and you're focusing on your job and you're focusing on your work, and you tend to forget how the negative impact that it has on your children and your family and your wife. And I'll never know for sure, but I can imagine now what it was like. There's a saying that a wife had. There's no better sound, at 3 a.m. to hear that Velcro unsnap. And what that means is, your husband made it home.
Yeah.
And the Velcro is, the belt and the vest, and you made it home, and they hear that sound and they know you're okay. So I know there was, that there was a lot of that, fear that you might not come home or, whatever. I know there was, I remember one time we had some gang members out at gunpoint that had robbed a 7-Eleven. We had them, proned out in the parking lot, and you and your mom and a friend of yours from Brazil was visiting. Remember that? You pulled up and you go, "Oh my God, that's my dad." And then when I realized it was, really almost unbelievable to me was one night early in the, 3 or 4 in the morning, we woke up and we saw, the flashing lights out our window. And I got up and looked out the window, and there was they were doing a high risk stop right outside our, we had a 2-story house. So I'm looking down on the traffic stop, and they had these guys out, at gunpoint, and I was critiquing the stop, where they had parked their car, how they'd positioned the lights, and everything, and the giving verbal commands and so forth. And I was sitting there telling Vera what they were doing right and what they were doing wrong, and didn't even dawn on me, oh my God, it's right outside my house. It just became normal, and that's when I kind of like, this is strange, when it just becomes that normal to see something like that every day. But I know it impacted you guys.
I would say, I don't know what to call it, because I don't know if you can even categorize post-traumatic stress or whatever, anxiety. I would say definitely I can't necessarily speak for mom, but I would assume it was the same, fear of losing your husband or your father when they're in law enforcement, for sure.
Yeah, I think if you're watching the news and you hear there's a shooting somewhere, and that's the area of town that I worked, or there's so many different scenarios, or you hear that an officer's been involved in a car accident or something, you automatically assume the worst. So that was, I guess if I had to think of a negative side, you asked me what I didn't like, I guess that would be it.
Worrying
about, not so much worrying about myself, but worrying about what my family was thinking that might happen. So I guess that would be it.
So I guess we can go into the whole defunding of the police.
Yeah, now I'm really going to get in trouble. No, I just think it's tragic that we've come to this point.
So when did this start, this whole defunding the police idea?
It's been around a while in different, especially, different cities and different places, and started out, like, I know where we were in California, there was a movement, the city council there had voted several times to cut some funding, cut certain programs, not a major dramatic cut, but enough to where it was significant.
Why? What was the reason?
I think it's, it depends on the department. It depends on the government, why they want to do it. But I think for sometimes it comes down to just, they're trying to make their budget, the city budget. And if they don't have enough money, they're going to cut something. And sometimes they choose law enforcement over some other program. So that's more of a kind of a natural process that whether you like it or not, it kind of makes sense because they're trying to prioritize things.
But you would think they would prioritize the safety of the people, and law enforcement gets paid very little already, and then they want to go and cut it even more.
You would think.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's government's primary role is the safety of its
Right.
the people, of the public. That's why it's called public safety, and it's a shame that police nowadays in certain communities and with certain people are seen as the enemy. And it's a lot of young people have jumped on that bandwagon, and what's really sad is that they don't know that they don't have the statistics. They don't look at the numbers. They don't know the facts. They're looking at very small percentage. I read something today that 2% of police officers or less are involved in illegal or activity that they shouldn't be involved in. But it also said that police officers deal with the 2% of the population that's causing the most problem, and so police officers tend to see that 2% is kind of through that lens, and the public is seeing police officers through that 2% lens of the ones that are doing something that they shouldn't be doing. I'm not saying that in any profession that they're all perfect. They're all there aren't corrupt police officers. There haven't been police officers that made poor decisions. There haven't been police officers that made intentionally bad decisions. Just like in any career. But I think it's highly over or exaggerated, the number and the frequency. I have seen so many good officers bend over backwards not to do harm, to do anything and everything they can to help people. I was listening to a podcast today about discretion and how police officers have discretion. We used to have a lot more, and for different things happened over time, laws changed, and in some cases what people don't understand is you don't have that discretion anymore. You have to make an arrest whether you really think it's the best thing or not. You don't have a choice. An example of that is domestic violence. That came about after O.J. Simpson, and so you walk into a scene and there's signs of visible injuries. Almost doesn't matter how insignificant they are. You're required by statute to make that arrest, and there were some times where that was a hard decision to make. I have several examples of that, but there are other things where you do have discretion. And I know I used to one of my field training officers told me he started every day with 5 traffic stops, but he didn't write a ticket. He just gave a warning and tried to, and it was a way to build good faith and goodwill with the citizens. And so I kind of tried to follow that. I wanted to keep people to be safe. Obviously, if it was something extreme, dangerous, then I would write a ticket or whatever I needed to do. But a lot of times it was just, hey, you didn't see that stop sign, or you were going a little too fast. Slow down and be careful and be safe. You've got a kid in the car or whatever. So it's not an easy job, but I think right now it's a very dangerous time because some of these cities have I think what happened, and really it was a dangerous time. We were heading down this path before. You're putting a lot of people, typically the communities that need the police the most are often the ones that go in this direction sometimes. And I know a lot of those people, those families, those mothers and fathers, and that's not what they want. This is a political thing a lot of times.
So who do you think is to blame for this whole? We learned that there was 13 states so far.
I'm not sure of the number, but I do know it's if you look at the states and the cities that have gone in this direction, their crime rate has soared. The number of homicides is just astronomical, and it's direct. I mean, if you don't have enough police officers, they're underfunded, understaffed. they're just not going to be able to serve as the deterrent that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And the other side of that is there's the term demilitarize the police. And again, it's terminology. People don't understand what that means. I made a comment the other day. It's like you don't want to give police officers a military style vehicle or helmets and shields because they look intimidating. When they're needed, they need to look intimidating. It's like you don't want to send a football player in to play a football game and not give him a helmet or shoulder pads because he looks intimidating. It's there for a purpose.
You want them to be prepared.
Prepared and protected so he doesn't get hurt and he's able to do his job.
Right.
And if you have adequate policing, you have enough police officers, and you're well funded and you're well trained, and you have a good rapport and a good relationship with your citizens, then you won't need all of that stuff. I mean, or you'll need it less often, less frequently. And so I really think it's sad because I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they're starting to regret some of the decisions they've made in some of these cities. And it's cost a lot of police officers their careers. They've decided to move on and do something else. And so what that's going to do is exacerbate the problem, because now you're going to lose the good ones, and you're going to replace them with what? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. And who are you going to call when you're in trouble?
Well, that's
real trouble.
Yeah, and how long is it going to take them to get there? And
right.
and it's ironic because sometimes I've seen some of the people that are the most adamant about defunding and reimagining police departments are the first to call the police when they get their tail in a crack. Mm-hmm. I've seen it over and over and over again. So I understand where it's coming from on one hand, because I know that it came out of grief and anger about something that happened with a police officer, but then the media takes that, blows it way out of proportion. Sometimes it's outright lies about what happens, releases information before they have all the facts. Mm-hmm. They get everybody whipped up and angry and scared.
A lot of it is the media's fault too.
I think a huge percentage of the media's fault,
and I think a lot of people, they don't want to see like their family members get arrested, and they want somebody to blame. And so, or their friends or coworkers. So instead of realizing that those people that are getting arrested need to take responsibility for their actions, they want to blame it on the police officers.
There's a certain amount of that. I think, and I have had this conversation before, but to me, one of the biggest problems in society today is the individual's lack of responsibility. Mm-hmm. Everyone needs to stop thinking in terms of groups, tribal politics, all this stuff, and focus on yourself. Make yourself a better person. Make your environment a better environment. Take care of your problems, your family, and then your house, and then your community, and it'll grow. Mm-hmm. But everybody. No, it's funny. Some people they're easy to criticize everybody else, but they don't look at themselves. They don't look at their shortcomings. What's going on in their life? Why do they have the problems that they have? They just want to blame it on somebody else. And I think that's one of the biggest problems we have today is lack of personal responsibility at all levels of society. So I think we're kind of at I hope we reached a critical tipping point. And I think people are starting to see that it might have gone a little too far. I am all for more training and more options for police officers. I don't think there's a police officer out there that would refuse training, especially if it was something that they felt like were really beneficial and made the community safer, made themselves safer, and made them better at their job. Actually made them better. Not something political that's just going to appease people. Something that actually helps them. So dealing with mental health situations and dealing with people that are in a mental health crisis. But this idea that you shouldn't send a police officer to a call like that, you should send a counselor. I've been in that situation, and it's extremely volatile. It can change on a dime, and you're putting a person that might be really good at that at high risk. there's a reason why, we get trained to de-escalate situations and hopefully call in for help when the time is right. But you have to make sure that this,
The
everybody.
therapy and stuff, that's for later. That's once they're
Yeah.
maybe off drugs or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, and I was at some of those scenes, like somebody's threatening suicide or whatever. You don't necessarily have time to wait. You start negotiating with them and talking to them and trying to convince them to put down the knife or the gun or whatever, and you do the best you can. But you can't sit back and wait to do that until the social worker gets there or the psychologist gets there. We're not psychologists, we're not psychiatrists, we're not social workers, but there's a piece of that in every police officer, and we're expected to do it and do it well, and when we don't, then we're accused of all kinds of things. So I'm seeing a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel. I think people are starting to realize that the majority of people, although it might have seemed like it this past summer, to be honest, I think so much of this was made worse by the pandemic. Everybody's been under so much stress and worried about getting sick, and a lot of people did get sick. Their family members get sick. They might have died. You put that together with the schools being out and all these kids being out of school and at home alone or out on the street or who knows where. That made it worse, and that's one of the reasons why crime is so bad. I mean, we talked about this before, but I still say that's probably going to be one of the decisions that we made as a society that's going to hurt us for a long time, was keeping kids out of schools for a year and a half. Virtual,
and businesses closed.
Businesses closed too. A lot of people. People lost their livelihoods. They were under stress. Social justice issues came to the forefront.
All the political stuff going on.
Yes, a major election. It was with an extremely divided country. So all of those things played right into this scenario, and then unfortunately, police officers were caught right in the middle of a lot of it.
So, what do you want people to know about police work and law enforcement work, and also what do you want, like, how do you feel people should get to know the work of a police? What are some things that people can do to really learn about police work and law enforcement?
Well, I think you can one thing you can call your department and ask if you can go on a ride along. You can attend neighborhood watch meetings where there's usually police officers there. You can ask questions to and so forth. But I think going on a ride along is, even though it's just a one time snapshot of what it's like, at least you get an idea, and that's one thing you can do. You got to realize police officers are your neighbors. They live in your cities, in your communities, in your neighborhoods, and
our family.
Our family. And you should get to know them. But they coach your kids' baseball teams. They're involved in a lot of different ways in the community. So there's ways to get to know them, like as individuals, not as a police officer, as a person. And I think that's the key. That's why I think when I was in the police department, I ran our PAL program, our Police Activities League program, and so the whole idea was that I worked with kids and they got to know me as a person, not as a police officer. They saw me in plain clothes. They saw me on going on trips and games and things, and so it was good for both of us. It was, once I knew them, knew their name, and I knew about their family and their situation, and they knew me. It really helped build that relationship, and so that type of community-oriented policing, I think, really works. But you have to have that relationship, and you have to build it somehow. And if you don't have enough officers on the force to be able to have, DARE officers or gang officers in the school, SROs in the schools, or grade officers in the schools, or in the community, then you're not going to have those opportunities to get to know each other. It's just the police officer driving by in the car, and it's you don't even know their name. So I think that's one thing people can do, and police officers can do, reach out themselves. I was, in Salinas we had, I don't know how many, I can't even remember how many police officers volunteered with the PAL program. Mm-hmm. So they coached our soccer teams, our baseball teams, our softball teams, our basketball teams, archery, bowling, ballet, all of those things. They were parent volunteers and police officer volunteers. Mm-hmm. And these are guys that had worked long shifts and hard hours and then still found time to volunteer with kids and go on trips and chaperone. A lot of people don't know that. And so I think that's something that they need to know, that they're people. And for the most part, they're really good people, and they care about their community. They care about your kids, and people should appreciate them for that.
They can be your friends, guys, not bad guys arresting you or something.
Well, I guess the motto there is don't break the law, and you won't have that person knocking on your door. But when you need them, they're there. Mm-hmm. And I just hope that things get back to that soon.
All right. This is the end of episode 3.